You can't allow yourself to stay there because at some point you can get stuck in the grief. And that's the thing I tell parents who have a child in active addiction, they're already grieving. And so I learned that diving into the pain for me, it became an opportunity for growth. And that's what I tell people. It's like, look, if you've got this pain in your life of this loved one who's battling addiction, so the best thing you can do is let go of your attempts to control them.
Okay, welcome to PEJ'S Recovery Corner. This is a recovery podcast where we talk about all things recovery. Recovery from what? Recovery from addiction, recovery from alcoholism, recovery from mental health. So before we get started, if you are watching this on YouTube, which is under my PEJ Interventions page, please like and subscribe. Also, we would love to hear from you in the comment section and share it everywhere. We want to carry the message of hope to as many people as possible. We get all kinds of guests that come on here from all walks of life, people that are in recovery from all the things that I named, but also professionals that work in the field, people that are on the front lines, doctors, interventionists, all different types of people that are always out there trying to save lives. And today I have a very, very special guest. His name is Darryl Rodgers. Hi, Darryl. Welcome to the corner.
Hey, Pej, thanks for having me today.
Yeah. So Darryl and I actually are part of a team. It's called Intervention on Call. We met through a gentleman by the name of Sam Davis. Darryl stands out to me in the sense I always have a lot of compassion for parents that have lost a loved one as a result of addiction, whether it was from the drug itself or something that happened that surrounded itself around that. And we can talk about that in a second because I know that you lost your son in 2014. Real quick, I was doing a little background check on you, and apparently you were a pilot. Is that right? Before? Corporate
Yeah,
pilot? Okay. And
yeah,
you also served in the Army National Guard in the past?
yes. I flew helicopters in the Guard. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for your
Mhm.
service.
Thank
Um,
you.
so you're out of South Carolina, correct?
I'm in North Carolina now.
Oh, North
I'm a
Carolina.
South Carolina native though. Yeah.
Okay. Um, so I'd like to, just kind of, we don't have to really delve into your past personally because it sounds like you weren't a man that struggled with addiction or anything like that. You had a son, right? Uh,
Yeah.
you also are an author of a book. What's the name of the book?
A Life Half Lived. And the
Okay.
subtitle is a true story of love, addiction, tragedy, and hope.
Okay. Um, let's go back. Let's talk about, your son's name was Chase, obviously. Tell us
Mhm.
about all of it. Tell us about how it all went down and, what was your role in all of it and what did you have to do and what was the outcome, please?
I do want to say something, Pej, before we get started that
Okay.
just so I don't forget about it, that we do have two boys. So
Yeah.
the other one, the youngest one, his name is Justin,
Okay.
and he's doing really well now. He's at Virginia Tech in a chemistry PhD program.
Okay. Wonderful. How old is he?
Yeah, 24, just turned 24.
Nice.
Yeah, really bright kid. Both boys were Eagle Scouts and both competed in track and field and football on the high school level and football at the collegiate level.
Love it. Love it. I relate. I was a scout myself. I love that stuff. I'm very athletic. Okay, wonderful for him. At least he's on the right path. Good. And Chase was his
Yeah.
older brother.
Chase was his older brother. And yeah, Chase, good kid growing up, really quiet, easygoing, laid back. And, was diagnosed ADHD really early on. And we struggled with that for a while because one of his teachers in particular was kind of pushing us, to take him to the doctor to get him diagnosed. And we didn't want to do that. We didn't want to put him on any meds or anything, but we eventually saw that he was going to struggle in school if we didn't take some kind of measures. So we did put him he did eventually go on a low dose of Concerta. And I always kept the dosage as low as I could, and as he grew, when he would go through growth spurts, we'd have to bump it just a little bit. I could tell, you could tell when it wasn't having the same effect.
How old was he
So
when he went on concerts? Just out of curiosity.
probably 7, I would guess, somewhere around
Okay.
there, 6 or 7.
And Concerta, although it's been around now for over a decade, to my knowledge, was kind of like the modern day Adderall.
Yeah, it's a more of a little bit slower release.
Hmm.
And so as he grew, when he was probably 12 or 13. I want to say 12, 11 or 12. We he did get a really, really small dose of Adderall just to tie him over. Because as the Concerta he was kind of coming down off of that at the end of the day, he needed a little bump in the mornings, a little bump in the afternoons. He got like 5 milligrams or something like that of Concerta. I mean of Adderall. It wasn't a whole lot. Um, but yeah,
Do
that's
you
how we.
do you regret him ever going on any of that?
That's a tough one to answer. I would say, yeah. I thought about homeschooling both of my kids, and if I had it to do over again, I probably would. And I think boys in particular, I've always felt, and I saw it particularly with Chase, that they need to be outdoors more and they need to be hands-on, a lot more hands-on learning. And sitting in a classroom, I think just for most boys is a difficult thing, but
Mm-hmm.
particularly for kids that are diagnosed ADHD. I mean, they're kids, the way they're wired up, they need more hands-on learning and they need to be at.
Stimulation. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
No, the reason I asked that is because I know the purpose of ADHD medications. Usually, for the very young kids, it's when they're hyperactive. It's supposed to simmer them down a bit, and then
Mhm.
obviously for young adults or even adults that are prescribed these for ADHD, it's more to concentrate better and to be more assertive and alert in, let's say, the classroom type setting if they're in colleges and such, or even in the workplace. But
Mhm.
I've worked in rehabs a lot, and when I've been running groups, this question would often come up: is how many of you guys ever been on ADHD medications from a young age? And a lot of hands would go up, and I would say, okay,
Yep.
so what's your drug of choice? What's your drug of choice? What's your drug of choice? And it was minimal opiate users, but a lot of methamphetamine or stimulant users, and so I would often wonder, does this create a dependency from early on in life for certain
Yeah.
people? Do they depend on something to be able to stimulate or even be able to have a certain type of mood? Uh,
Yeah.
Dependent also, it fluctuates too from when you have to up the dose or down the dose and all that too. So that's kind of why I asked that question. Now,
Yeah, yeah, that's a great question because I ask parents that all the time too. When I talk to parents, it's like, has your child ever been diagnosed ADD, ADHD?
yeah,
And like 90% of the time, the answer is yes, probably. I'm
yeah,
not done a scientific study on it,
mm,
but yeah, I mean it's pretty common. So I've had those same kinds of thoughts. And he was diagnosed ADD.
hmm,
But I've always said, that the psychiatrist had a snapshot. He didn't see the hyperactivity that day when he was in his office, but he definitely had moments where he could be very impulsive, very hyperactive.
understood. As a matter of fact, even when I got sober, I wasn't diagnosed by anybody, but I definitely, after becoming a professional working in the field, I thought, oh, that sounds familiar. I think that was me. That was me. That was it. Sometimes
Hmm.
people would be talking to me, and the body was there, but my brain
Yeah,
was
somewhere else. Yeah.
just running and running and running. So
Uh-huh.
I may have even been diagnosed myself early on, but I try to really
Hmm.
focus on that and pay attention to it. So living with Chase, up and as he was growing up, he was a good kid.
Yeah, very active in sports. Like I said, kind of quiet and easy going. And I don't know, a sort of part of me saw it in him, in part not so much, that we were a lot alike. I think my personality and Chase, I was never diagnosed ADHD, but I think like most boys, I could daydream with the best of them at times, but I think in terms of, I was always kind of low self-esteem, um, very quiet, very shy, and I could see that in Chase too. But Chase's way of dealing with it was to be the class clown. And I was never that guy. He had a really odd sense of humor, but he just keep people laughing all the time. He was very much like that. But I did not realize until, excuse me, I didn't realize until recently, my wife uncovered I wish I didn't think of this beforehand, but that she uncovered a note that he had written in one of his journals. And he really comes out in that journal note about how low his self-esteem was. He just felt like he was not intelligent and that he didn't fit in anywhere. And all of this was in high school, we think, probably his senior year of high school. And he even mentioned in there, like, I feel like I should just, almost like a suicidal type ideation in within that note.
Hmm.
And man, that really hit me. That really punched me in the gut when I came across that. Um, and the first time I've shared that, because like I said, she just came across it just a few weeks ago.
Hmm.
So, that was something he was obviously struggling with more than I realized. I thought he was pretty popular. He was popular, because he was funny and he was outgoing, and in that sense, he was funny, and he was, you know, he was a lot smarter than he gave himself credit for. He just didn't see it in himself. That self-esteem issue was there. I think because of the ADHD, probably. Um,
Scholastically, did he achieve well?
he was an average to slightly above average student, but again, it came back down to even with the medication, focus issues in the classroom.
Yeah.
But definitely bright, and the fact that did not see himself as outgoing, or as socially, he didn't feel like he fit in well. And everybody loved Chase. He had tons of friends that really thought a lot of him. And in terms of his intellectual abilities, just reading that note, his handwriting was good. He made a comment in the note that's like, if I tried to write this fast, my handwriting would be not so great, but just if you look at the cover of the book that I wrote, that's a photo that he took of himself with his cell phone, and he did a little bit of editing on the one eye to make it pop. But he was always really good. If I ever needed to edit something, if I was working on some kind of a project, and I said, "Hey, Chase," I would go to him. And this was back in the days. I didn't have Photoshop, and we had a program called GIMP, which
Hmm.
was like a freeware type Photoshop. And he would just use that to edit photos and things. And I would say, Chase, where'd you learn how to do that? I don't know, I just know how to do it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So, just naturally gifted with things like that. And he did not see that ability in himself.
Hmm. So as he got through high school, did he finish on time?
Yeah, so we transferred him middle of his junior year to a military school. And it was probably middle of his sophomore year where I began to notice some issues with Chase. Well, he's my first teenager, he's our oldest son. So I thought, well, this is just my first thought was this is just what a normal teenage boy goes through. He's just struggling with some things. And uh was getting in a little trouble here or there, nothing really serious. Um he was having some girl troubles. There was a girl that he was attracted to, and she seemed to be attracted to him, but then she called it off. Well, he kept calling her house. He didn't understand why, and he just wanted to know why. What did I do wrong? And then her dad called me, so things like that, little things like that were happening, but then he was failing one of his classes.
Is that why
And
why he sent him to boarding school just to achieve better?
No, it was a combination of things. It was the warning signs. It was he was failing his Spanish class. Some of his other grades were diving. He was becoming more rebellious at home. I could see a change in the way the clothing, the way he was wearing his clothes, more to fit in and not what he would normally wear. His friends at school, people he was hanging out with. Just I was seeing a lot of different changes with them that didn't make sense to me, and a little bit of signs of trouble. I caught him in some lies. Caught him in
Hmm.
2 or 3 lies. He had when he was a little kid. If something bad happened, he would tell the truth, even if he knew it was going to get him in trouble. Now, all of a sudden, I'm catching him in lies. I'm like, what is going on with this kid? So, having a military background myself,
Yeah.
I felt like the structured environment and the discipline would be good for him, at the military school. And that's why we transferred him. We kind of started the process when he was in the 10th grade, but by the time he got actually transferred, he was in the middle of his junior year.
Hmm. So then did he finish on time once he went there?
He did finish on time. Sorry, I got sidetracked on the question a little bit, but he did finish on time, and he improved his grades while he was there. He had an outstanding senior year of football there. He was the team that he came from was going. They were like a 4A. They were like top level, going class in North Carolina football teams, and they were going to playoffs every year. And he was a smaller fish in a bigger pond. And then he moved to he was all now he was a big fish in a small pond with the football team. And he was one of their outstanding players. He's probably the top defensive player they had, or one of the top defensive players. And he was a cornerback and safety, and also played on special teams and played a little bit of wide receiver um, uh, on offense. But he had a really good year there, and then was scouted by it was mostly Division II type teams that were looking at him, and he ended up there was an NAIA school that offered him some scholarship money to come to school there and play football for them in Illinois. So he took them up on that offer and headed off to college there.
Okay, so then when he went to college from there?
Yeah, he left there and came back home for the summer, after he graduated high school. And he had a love interest while he was in his senior year of high school there. He met a girl. There was a girls' boarding school only about a mile away from this military school in this small town. And
Isn't
you
it
can
funny how you can try to divide them, but they'll still find each other?
Oh yeah, he got into all kinds of trouble over this girl, and he anyway he ended. It was a really cute girl, and all the girls that attended this girls' boarding school are all from very wealthy families, and she was from a very wealthy family in Louisiana. And anyway, but he left to go off to college, and I'll let you ask the next question to see
Okay,
where it goes from there. But
so he was in college. What, he graduated when he was what, 17, 18 years old?
yeah, 18.
Okay, and
And
then when he was in college, obviously, when this event happened, because I want to kind of lead up to what happened there, was he
mhm.
away when this event happened, where the accident happened, or
He
was he
came
in
back
college?
home.
He was
He,
back
he,
home.
he dropped out. He dropped out of college. Yeah, he dropped out he only made it through part way of the second semester. He was redshirted on the football team there his freshman year, so he didn't play football. He just practiced and all, and suited up on the sidelines for the games. But um, I pretty early on. I mean, I got into some really bad stuff there. I was spying on him, and because I knew when he left high school, I knew he was going to get in trouble, and I knew he was going to, head down a bad path in college. And so I was kind of keeping track of him. And he started out with basically alcohol and marijuana. and smoking cigarettes. And then he started, I could just tell he was hanging with a rough crowd, but then he started experimenting with Molly while he was there.
Hmm.
Now
Okay.
that's all that I know of that he used. He may have used some other things, but the only thing that I know for sure that he used, well, I had heard that he had experimented while he was in while he was at the military school. He experimented with some K2 spice, which is like a synthetic,
Marijuana.
supposed to be like marijuana,
Yeah.
similar to marijuana high, but so he'd experimented with a little bit of that and alcohol in high school apparently. But as far as I know, those are the only substances he ever used. And for him, it was mostly the marijuana that he wanted to use. I don't know what forms of marijuana he used other than the leaf. I don't know what other things he tried. Um, but he dropped out middle of his um, second semester. He had come home for Christmas after the first semester, and he was on academic probation because he wasn't going to any of his classes. And he says, like, I talked to him then. I said, look, Chase, college is not for everybody. If you want to go to a like a if you want to go to a trade school, if you want to go to a community college and learn a trade, I'll pay for you to do that. There's the military. He was in ROTC, Navy ROTC in high school, and then he had the military school after that. So I was like, look, there's the military. One of his friends was in the Marines, and he was like trying to recruit him. I was like, look, you could be a Marine, man. Like, do something with your life. But you know, if you want, if college is not for you, that's okay. No, no, Dad, I want to go back to college. I want to go back to college. So I'm like, okay. But I kind of knew when he went, the only reason he wanted to go back was to party. And
I'll I'll say this. I myself, when I was in the art institute as an artist,
uh-huh,
fail, failing my classes because I was on heavy drugs. Whenever somebody gets put on academic probation twice, in my case twice,
uh,
it's an
uh-huh.
indicator that there might be something going on with that
That's
person
right.
psychologically, right?
Uh-huh.
Um, so okay, so then so he came back home at this time. He was, not going to school or anything like that, correct?
That's correct. And he was just
And
kind of hanging out at home.
was his day to day like just hanging out with friends, going and partying, or working at
Well,
all?
for a very short period of time, he was just hanging out at home, and I don't know what all he was doing with this time, but it didn't take him long to gravitate to, he found a girl that she was using, and she was, he started hanging out with her, and then he would be gone. And he would be gone for days at a time, and I wouldn't know where he was. And my wife said, "Look, Chase, really only have one rule. If you're going to live at home, you're not pursuing a job, career right now. You're not looking for work. You're not going to school. The one rule I have is if you're going to be gone overnight, you have to let us know, and you have to give us some idea of where you are." And he wouldn't follow that rule, and finally, one day he had been gone for several days, and I hadn't heard anything from him. He wouldn't respond to us. We would try to text, try to call, nothing. And so he did that. He'd been gone for like 3 or 4 days, and he showed up at the front door. And I went to the door, and I wouldn't let him in. And that broke my heart. Man, that was so hard. And I felt like even at that time, with as little knowledge as I had of addiction, I felt like to let him in would be to continue to enable his self-destructive behavior. So I said, no, not going to let him in. And I watched him go back and get in that car. The car was just waiting on him. There's his friend in the car, and he went and got back in the car, and they drove away. And that killed me, man. It was so hard not knowing when or if I'd ever see him again. Um, my wife was more of that mindset than I was. Like, she didn't have any problem with me not letting him in at all. She was kind of like getting kind of fed up with everything, with his behavior. And I guess I was probably more of the enabler, but anyway, he I kept up with him on social media. He was losing weight rapidly. I could see pictures that he would post, very pale, glassy eyed, pictures he would post in a hotel room. They're all laying, all him and all of his friends laying all over bed, just like laying all over the place. It's obvious
Yeah.
what's going on here. And I'm just like scared out of my mind. Like, what am I going to do?
So what led up to the time when he was in the accident?
Well, we did have an intervention for him
You did?
because, yeah. So when I was sitting there racking my brain, what are we going to do? The word intervention popped into my head. Well, I didn't know the first thing about an intervention. The only thing I knew is I had seen a show on TV and I'd never watched a whole episode. Just going through channels, I came across this show, Intervention, and I watched maybe 5 minutes of it, two or three different occasions, and I saw enough of it to get somewhat of an idea of what an intervention was. And I thought, I need an intervention. We need an intervention for Chase. I need to get him into treatment. And in my mind, there were different thoughts going at the time, but somewhere in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, if we just spend enough money, get him into the right program, they're going to fix him and they're going to send him back to us. He's going to be better and everything's going to be okay. And they're going to save his life.
Hmm.
That was kind of my thinking somewhere in the back. And part of me knew that wasn't right, but there's a part of me that wanted to believe that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So,
I think that happens with a lot of people that want to send their kid to go get fixed.
yeah, right. And I didn't see what my role was. And even though the interventionist, to his credit, sort of, he tried to direct me like, hey, man, when we had the intervention. And during the intervention, by the way, the intervention, um, Chase was shaking his head the whole time. No, no, I don't need to go to treatment. I'm fine. You guys are crazy. There's nothing wrong with me. And
Of
the
course.
interventions, he was really good at, just keeping the pressure on and handling all of his objections. And by this time we'd all read through the letters and everything. And
So y'all did a
but
Johnson model.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I'm going to tell you something. It was a very emotionally powerful event, and we were all in tears, everybody, including Chase.
Hmm.
And at the end of that, he's like, fine. Finally, he's like, okay, just to make you guys happy. There's nothing wrong with me, but here's what's going to happen. I'm going to go down there. They're going to drug test me. They're going to see I'm clean. I don't have a problem, and they're going to send me back. And you guys got to promise me that I can have my car, because I had a car that my parents had left in a handwritten note that Chase was to get this car, but my brother had power of attorney, and so he had signed the title over to me. I think he sort of saw the handwriting on the wall with Chase. And so I had withheld the car from Chase because I felt like he wasn't ready for a car, based on the way he was behaving. So we agreed, okay, go to treatment. You can have your car, if you just go to treatment. So he went to a 30-day program in South Florida, and then he went to a halfway house. He bounced around to probably half a dozen different halfway houses while he was down there.
Wow.
Um, some of them were poorly managed. Some of them, he just had an attitude, different things. But he ended up in a really good one. But
Hmm.
there was a girl he had met there that was really cute, and they had hatched this plan. They were going to elope and get married, and so he she left, and then he left shortly after. He got himself kicked out, and he so the guy that runs the halfway house called me and said, Mr. Rogers kicking Chase out and putting him out on the street. You better come get him because he doesn't have any place to go. Well, I didn't know any better. And so I drove down to Florida and picked him up. He moved back in with us. And eventually, he and I had another run in about the car. And then he He left, he moved out, and he moved in with this girl and another girl, different girl. By this time, the other one had sort of moved on, and he was just looking for a roommate, but he ended up moving in with this girl, and they became a romantic thing. Um, Another really cute girl, and he knew how to find the cute girls, right?
Yeah, yeah. Ch- Ch-
So
Chase knew how to get women, it sounds like.
he did, man.
Charmer.
He was a
So,
charmer. He was for sure. And anyway, but so she called me one day and she said, "Mr. Rogers, you can come get your son now."
so she had had it with him.
I said, "Well, where is he?" "Well, I've kicked him out of my apartment. I locked him out, and he's sitting outside my apartment." And I went over to her apartment, and he had a trunk that he had from military school that had all of his belongings in it. And he's sitting on that trunk at the top of a flight of stairs right outside of her apartment. And I went up there, helped him. We loaded his trunk in the car, and he moved back in with us for a while. So as the months go by, like months and months go by, like 9 months from the time that he had left treatment, and he comes to me one day. I knew he was headed in a bad direction, and he had gotten a job in the meantime. When he came back home, he got a job,
Mhm.
and he jumped through all the loopholes. He did all the things that I asked him to do because he kept asking me for his car. I said, "Chase, go get a job. Show me you can hold down a job. Go to IOP 2 nights a week." He did all of those things. He was doing all of that. And so I gave him the car. I signed the car over to him eventually. And things were moving in a better direction. We were getting along better. Everything was going along pretty smoothly, but I could just sense that he was headed in a bad direction. And so he comes to me one day and said, "Dad, I've decided I'm going to move to Florida." I said, "Why are you moving to Florida?" "Well, hanging around a rough crowd again." I said, "I know." He said, "I'm headed in a bad direction again." And he said, "I know I need to sort of separate myself from these people, but I just don't know how to do it other than to move." And I said, "I've taken a job transfer to Florida back to the area where I was in treatment." Well, it could be that he had had a little bit of a run-in with some drug dealers too. Okay. I
Hmm.
just don't know. I don't know the whole story there, but there's some things that lead me to believe that that could be part of it. So, anyway, I told my wife, I said, "Kim, um, Chase said he wants to move back to Florida. He's already taken a job transfer down there. Here's when he's planning to leave." So she made him promise that he would come by and have a meal with us before leaving. So the day comes that he's supposed to show up and have a meal with us, and he doesn't show up. We're all waiting around for him. It's getting later in the afternoon, and we kind of gave up that he was going to show up. So we ate our meal and we moved to the living room, and our youngest son Justin was in the 8th grade at the time.
Hmm.
Uh, he's in there with us, and we're just kind of him and I and Justin. We're kind of surfing channels. We're talking a little bit, looking at our phones, and I had a phone call from one of my friends, and I didn't want to disturb Kim and Justin with my phone conversation. So I went outside. It was May 29th, 2014, beautiful day out. I'm out in the front lawn talking to my friend on the phone, and a City of Raleigh police cruiser pulled up to the curb in front of our house. We live in a neighboring city, which is Cary, and I had seen other Cary police cruisers there before, but I'd never seen City of Raleigh police cruiser, and that kind of caught my attention. Then the officer gets out of the car and he starts up my driveway. And I told my friend I need to go. Apparently Chase is in some kind of trouble. And so I hang up the phone, and I've told this story thousands of times, Pedge, and it's still hard to get through this part.
I'm sure.
Uh, Literally thousands of times I've given this speech all over the place. But so I go to meet the officer in our driveway, and that's where he told me, "Mr. Rogers has been a bad wreck out on I-40, and your son Chase died at the scene." And right there where we were standing, almost in that exact spot, is I can't tell you how many times I used to throw the football with him, and I would just throw it just out of reach just to watch him use his athleticism, make diving catches, almost in that same spot where we were standing, this officer's telling me, breaking the news to me, and at one point I can remember telling the officer, like, man, your job sucks. I would hate to have your job,
Yeah, to
and
have to go and tell like somebody about
yeah,
something.
yeah. I'm like, I really feel bad for you. And he's like, I've done this a lot of times, but you're the only person that's ever consoled me.
About what I
But
have to do.
yeah, but because he's like, usually people don't take it too well. And I'm like, well, I could sort of see it coming. On one hand, I said, but I just, in that moment, I just really felt bad for him for having to break the news to me. And he asked me, he said, well, do you have other family inside that you'd like me to notify? And I said, well, my wife and my younger son are in there. But I said, I feel like that's my job as the man of the house. That's my job. And he asked me if he could go with me for support, and I agreed to that. So we go in through the front door. I go in first, and he comes in behind me. And I broke the news to my wife, Kim, and to Justin, and we cried for a long time. And once we got settled down, um, the officer, we began to ask him questions about what had happened, and he didn't have a lot of answers, that day. But as the days went by, we began to hear some rumors, and one of the rumors was that Chase and some of his friends, they had thrown a going away party for Chase the night before, and there were a lot of drugs and alcohol at the party that were consumed, and that Chase and some of his friends woke up the next morning feeling hungover, and so they decided to go to a park near our home. It's within walking distance of our house, and smoke some marijuana in that park to help them cope with their nausea and with their hangover. And so I did see the police report and parts of it, and it did say in the police report that they did in fact go to that park and they did smoke marijuana there. And then shortly afterwards, they got into the car, into Chase's car, and he let a girl that was with him, a girl that he had dated, with the one that he lived with for a little while, near our home. He let her get behind the wheel of his car. She was 18 years old. She didn't have a driver's license. Just didn't think it was important to have one. She'd been driving for a little while. Chase got in the front passenger seat. Another kid got in the back seat, and they they left the park. Um, they made one quick stop to grab a bite to eat, headed out on the I-40, headed eastbound, and they only made it a few miles before she lost control of Chase's car in a curve. They were running about 70, and I believe she drifted over on somebody based on some eyewitness reports. And one of the other drivers she drifted over on blew the horn at her, and she overreacted and lost control. But she spun out of control, left the road, struck a tree. They were running about 71 or about 60 by the time they impacted the tree. It actually impacted on the driver's side, rear door, but then it rolled up and kind of wrapped around the tree. And when it rolled up on its side, the tree came kind of diagonally across the car and right across where Chase was sitting. And so he died at the scene, probably died on impact or shortly thereafter. But it took firefighters and emergency personnel almost an hour to get the three of them out of the car because it was just such a mangled mess. And so they transported the two survivors, the driver and the kid in the back seat. And they had some serious injuries, but they transported them to the hospital right away. And then over the next several weeks, they recovered from their injuries to the extent they could return home to recover there. Um, but
Wow.
7 months after the wreck, a few weeks prior to what would have been her first court appearance, the girl that was driving Chase's car died after a fire broke out in her apartment. The fire chief said, based on his department's investigation, they believe that she poured gasoline all over the floor of her apartment, stood in the middle of it, and ignited it. There
So she
were
she took her own life based off of the guilt that she was carrying about it, possibly?
That would be the assumption. And that's what everybody seems to think. I don't think she ever really verbalized that. There were two suicide notes that were found. One was online and it was fairly cryptic. And the other note, it was a physical note that somehow survived the fire. Her mother told me about that note, and I've never seen it. I don't know what was in it. So, but I would assume that the guilt had a lot to do with it, that her role that she played, the role that she played in Chase's death. Um, and honestly, I had a lot of anger towards her and other people, which it's not really logical now looking back on it in a lot of ways, because Chase was the oldest one there. It was his car.
Hmm.
He smoked with them. He bore as much responsibility as anyone there that day. Um, but grief isn't really logical. And when you're grieving, you need someone to be angry at sometimes. People go through different
Yeah,
stages,
there's
but
different stages. There's different stages of grief. I mean, obviously, I don't have any kids, so I don't know what that would feel like to lose your own, offspring. I think it's one of the something that shouldn't happen, but it happens all too often, especially in this day and age with the fentanyl craze and everything that's going on.
right.
Um, I've worked with parents that have lost more than one sibling to addiction. Uh, Lady out of
Yeah,
Ohio, her son, both of her sons. I mean, one of them, they're not sure if it was addiction, but I think they assumed. Um, so over the years, you obviously wrote your book, but you also had mentioned to me that your outlook has changed. You're now a professional that works in the field, so you get to see the stuff on the front lines. And I'm sure a lot of it might bring back memories of, what it was like, or what a parent feels like when they know that their loved one is struggling without them even knowing that they're struggling, but that the family also takes on the emotions of everything that comes with it. And so, uh, as far as your grieving process, well, obviously you're never going to be the same. But
that's
in
right.
in healing, can you talk a little bit about why your outlook's changed?
Yeah. So, I started out doing prevention speaking, and my message was pretty much in the beginning the Nancy Reagan approach is like, just say no to drugs,
Yeah,
because I didn't know what I didn't know.
yeah,
But I told Chase's story, and I could tell the story pretty well. But I went from that. I knew there was more I needed to learn, and I was just trying to figure it out. So uh, at one point, I reached out to the interventionist who did the intervention for Chase, and I asked him. I said, what else can I do to learn more about addiction, and how can I help? What are some things I can do? And he directed me to an organization called PAL, which is Parents of Addicted Loved Ones, which is a peer support group for parents. It's a nonprofit, and so I started facilitating a PAL group, which I still to this day do. We moved online during COVID, and we just stayed online. But so what I found out was through the speaking, through facilitating the PAL group, I learned a lot through facilitating the PAL group. And then just moving into, family recovery coaching and interventions, I learned more about the role of the family. And I've learned more about why, you know, how do people end up experimenting with drugs, and how did they end up addicted to drugs or alcohol, which is a drug, but a lot of people don't see it that way necessarily. But so I have a lot more compassion now for people who who find themselves in addiction. And it's like, man, they're, they feel trapped. I was just talking to a mother earlier today. It's like, man, they want a way out, but they don't know how to get out.
Exactly.
And as a parent in that situation, you feel trapped too. As a family member, you feel trapped too, but in a different way. And as parents, all too often, that we feel fear. We're so fearful that something bad is going to happen to our child. Now, I know there's also emotions like guilt and shame that come up, but I feel like the fear is the big one. A lot of times, parents are so paralyzed with fear that they will not take the action steps that they need to take to change the dynamics of the situation. Um, and
Do you often go back to thinking about how it all went down and beat yourself up, or have you beat yourself up with,
oh
I shouldn't
yeah,
have done that, I shouldn't have done this, I shouldn't have done that. I'm
oh
sure
yeah,
that
for sure.
that comes with part of the guilt that one has within themselves. Then obviously the anger that comes out. So you got to be angry at somebody, right? You have to be angry. Was it her fault because she was the one driving? She didn't even have a license, right? All these
Right.
different
Yeah.
variables. Um, I'm sure you've gone through all that.
Oh
I
yeah.
often, when I'm as an interventionist and a recovery coach, when I'm talking to families, there's a lot. You're absolutely right. There's so much fear that's involved with these families that they don't know how to process any of it. It's all sometimes it's so new to them. They haven't experienced anything like this. And I often tell them, like, listen, with all due respect, I know you have a good kid. You try to raise them to be a good person. They are a good person. But when it comes to addiction, addiction's like a big monster. And when the monster overtakes your loved one, it's 98% the monster's in control and 2% the little silent voice within them, their good part, the part that really does want to be well, is
Uh-huh.
overpowered by the strength of the monster.
That's
So
right.
we have to be careful as family members to not feel bad for the monster, to
Right.
not negotiate with the monster, to not be manipulated by the monster because the monster is now running the show. That's like the
Hmm.
best way for me to dress it up and make it,
That's a really,
more realistic.
yeah, that's a really good word picture. I like how you do that. That's a really good way to describe it.
Well, I think back to like when, I know that you said that Chase, the power of attorney was from I think his uncle, right? And the
Yeah.
fact that he was
Hmm.
going to be able to have that car, I'm sure you probably went back and thought, I shouldn't have given him the car. I shouldn't have given him the car, And then we could beat ourselves up, but I think
Yeah.
sadly, everything happens for a reason. And
Yep.
there are not a lot of parents that come out of losing their loved one to something that's as tragic as this, to where they really want to say anything anymore. They don't know. Like they're crippled with sadness, with hurt. So
Hmm.
I commend the parents like yourself that do want to go out and educate and help. And I think to myself, like as an interventionist myself, us being part of the same team, it's easier for me if I'm doing an intervention on somebody that's in, let's say, a addiction or an opiate addiction or alcohol addiction, because I was a polysubstance abuser. I can sometimes disclose my own past experiences within the process of addiction to be able to
Hmm.
try to win over the person and let them understand, listen, I get it. Like I felt like this before, and now I've changed, and I really want to see that for you. But you, as a parent that's lost a loved one, I'm sure that your experience can definitely be effective in the way that you do the work that you do.
Yeah, it definitely has helped me to be able to connect with parents. Um, where I have to watch myself is that I don't get drawn into their world, that I don't start falling back into, feeling like that parent again, feeling sorry for them. Instead, I have to be able to push them, to nudge them to do the things that they need to do, to take those actions that they need to take, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. It's almost like you're reliving your own experience, but this time, instead of going back and beating yourself up for, I could have, should have, would have done all this, and why didn't I do this? Instead, now you're coaching them,
Yeah,
not telling them what to do, because we never tell them what to do, right?
that's
Like
right.
I
That's
mean,
right.
that's the last thing I'm going to do is tell a parent you should kick them out. Like
Right.
But I often find myself saying, I'm not going to tell you to do that, but I know if it was my kid, this is probably what
Right.
I would do. Because heaven forbid if I say kick them out and they kick them out on the street and something happens at 1% time that something tragic happens, they'll
That's
be like,
right.
well,
Yeah.
the PEJ told us to kick them out. No, I didn't tell you to kick them out.
Right.
But,
Right.
but even so, I mean, I was trying to work on a case with the individual last year, and I've been trying to help this young man since he was an adolescent. And it was like
Hmm.
2 or 3 years. He even came through our sober living 7 different times. And finally, I had to, draw the line, put up the boundary, and not allow him to come back anymore. But I worked very closely with his family, and unfortunately, the kid got caught up with the wrong people. There was sales of fentanyl and things like that that he was involved with, but he was murdered. He was murdered by somebody that was supposedly his own friend. It wasn't even, yeah, he was caught up in some kind of gang activity and things like that. But this guy that killed him wasn't a gang
Hmm.
member. This was a guy that was probably thought he was a gang member that happened to have a gun, and I think probably was owed some money by him, and it was like execution stuff. Parents have never been the same. The dad stopped talking to me. The dad,
Hmm.
the dad unfriended me on Facebook, and I even saw him in passing one day, and he didn't want to talk to me. And I get it.
Yeah.
Like I I realized that dad is probably going through so much grieving pain as a
Yeah.
result of losing his son that he's probably in his head constantly doing the coulda, shoulda, woulda thing every
Yeah.
single day, and it's going to take some time, for him to be able to process it.
Yeah, and I think it's fine to go through the coulda, woulda, shoulda, and I've talked about that. I think I know I've got a video on TikTok where I talk about that a little bit. I think it's fine to go there, but you can't stay there. You can't allow yourself to stay there because at some point you can get stuck in the grief, and that's the thing I tell parents. Parents who have a child in active addiction, they're already grieving. It's a different type of grief, but they're already grieving, and you can get stuck in that kind of grief as well as you can get stuck in the grief that comes from losing a child. So what I learned to do was to look, this grief is painful. It's bringing me all this pain. And I can either curl up in a fetal position and just feel sorry for myself and feel bad the rest of my life, or I've got this life left to live. I can do something with it. And so I learned that diving into the pain for me, it became an opportunity for growth. And that's what I tell people. It's like, look, if you've got this pain in your life of this loved one who's battling addiction, you don't have any control over them. You have no control. And your attempts to control are going to be futile. They're going to be frustrating for you and for them. So the best thing you can do is let go of your attempts to control them. That gives them a better opportunity to recover. And while you're doing that, dive into your own work, your own self-help, your own what can you do to grow personally and spiritually. And when you do that, you're taking that opportunity to grow no matter what comes down the road,
Mm-hmm.
whether they recover or whether they don't. You're preparing yourself. You're
Yes.
preparing yourself to still be able to have a good life and to be functioning for the rest of your family members and other people that are out there and your friends.
Totally. They say pain is a touchstone to all spiritual growth. We've got to encounter this pain to be able to grow from it.
That is
So,
so true.
very well said. So, before we sign off, I'm not gonna ask you if you were to write another book because I know you mentioned yesterday. I think it's time for me to write another book. I'm not gonna ask you what you're gonna write about, but I'm gonna push you to write it because I really, I'm gonna actually get your book. I haven't even got a chance to get it yet, but I'm gonna get your book so I can read it because I'm always interested in seeing how people process and what they write. And I know that I think you're, what is it, 10 years now since you've lost your son, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So let's hope that something new and good comes up soon. And I appreciate you coming out and talking about this today. How can people get a hold of you if they want to talk to you, if they want to receive some coaching from you, an intervention? How can people find you?
They can go to thefamilyrecoverycoach.com, thefamilyrecoverycoach.com. That's my website. There are plenty of resources there and ways to get in touch with me there, or they can reach out to me with an email that is Rodgers, Drodgers 61 at hotmail.com. So either way,
And that's how
I'm
they can
all
they,
over.
they can
Go ahead.
also find you like that if they want to do have you do some public speaking, correct?
Yeah, public speaking, or if they need an intervention. I started out really with the family recovery coaching, well, really with the speaking, and then family recovery coaching, and now interventions. But it all really ties together so well. And now that I have the experience, the training with the interventions, I've got the recovery coach experience. Um, those are things that I can draw from to put into my speeches, and to write a new book with. There's a lot of lessons that I've learned.
Absolutely. Yep. Yeah. Well, thank you for being who you are. You're my hero, most definitely. I love the work that you do and just the man that you are. And this has been another episode of PEJ'S Recovery Corner. Thank you, Darryl, for coming on today. Um, I'm always going to be working alongside you, fighting the good fight, trying to help as many people as we can. Um, Again, if you're listening to us on any podcast platform, we are available on all platforms. But if you are on YouTube, you can find me on PEJ Interventions. That's PEJ Interventions, and look for the podcast PEJ's Recovery Corner. Please like, subscribe, comment, and we would love to hear from you. Until we meet again, thank you, Darryl. Have a good day. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you, Pej.